Marcus Williams checked his watch for the third time as the subway train crawled through the tunnel. He was already 20 minutes late, and his civil procedure professor had been clear. Attendance at a live court hearing was mandatory. The train finally lurched to a stop, and Marcus squeezed through the closing doors, sprinting up the station steps two at a time. The downtown courthouse loomed ahead, its stone columns and brass doors intimidating even in the morning light. Marcus had been there before during his legal internship, but today felt different. Today he was just supposed to observe, take notes, and write a reflection paper. Nothing complicated. Just sit quietly in the back and watch justice in action. He pushed through the heavy courthouse doors, his vest and white shirt slightly wrinkled from the rushed commute. Marcus had come straight from his part-time job at the legal aid office, where he worked mornings before classes. There hadn't been time to change into something more formal. He figured it didn't matter, he was just an observer after all. The security line moved slowly. Marcus tapped his foot impatiently as an elderly woman ahead of him struggled to remove her shoes. By the time he cleared security and found courtroom 4B on the third floor, he was nearly 30 minutes late. He took a deep breath, straightened his vest, and quietly opened the courtroom door. The heavy door creaked louder than Marcus expected. Every head in the courtroom turned toward him. His heart sank. "Well, well, well," a stern voice boomed from the bench. "How gracious of you to join us." Marcus froze. Judge Richard Hartwell sat elevated behind the bench, his black robes making him look even more imposing. The judge was somewhere in his late 50s, with gray hair combed perfectly to the side and sharp eyes that seemed to cut right through Marcus. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Marcus said quietly, trying to slip into the back row. "I was just late," the judge interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me guess. You lost track of time. Your alarm didn't go off. The dog ate your subpoena?" A few people in the courtroom snickered. Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks. "No, Your Honor, the subway was delayed and I—" "Save it," Judge Hartwell waved his hand dismissively. "I've heard every excuse imaginable. Young people today seem to think the world operates on their schedule, that the court will simply wait while they stroll in whenever convenient." Marcus opened his mouth to explain that he was just a law student there to observe, not a party to any case, but something in the judge's expression told him to stay quiet. He slid into the back row, pulling out his notebook as quietly as possible. "Let the record show," Judge Hartwell announced, "that the defendant has finally decided to grace us with his presence." Marcus's head snapped up. "Your Honor, I'm not—" "Sit down and be quiet," the judge commanded. "You've wasted enough of this court's time." Confused and embarrassed, Marcus sank into his seat. A few people in the gallery glanced at him with sympathy, others with barely concealed amusement. The bailiff, an older black man with kind eyes, gave Marcus a slight nod, as if to say, "Just write it out." Judge Hartwell shuffled some papers on his bench. "Now, let's proceed with the matter at hand. Case number 2024 CV 8847, Chen versus Grandstone Corporation. Is the plaintiff ready?" "Yes, Your Honor." A sharp-dressed attorney stood up from the left table. He wore an expensive suit and had the confident air of someone who won more cases than he lost. His briefcase probably cost more than Marcus's entire month's rent. "And the defense?" Judge Hartwell asked, looking toward the right table. An elderly Asian woman stood up hesitantly. She wore a simple dress and clutched a worn folder against her chest. Her hands trembled slightly. "Your Honor, my attorney, he called this morning. He said he can't come. His daughter is in the hospital." Judge Hartwell's expression didn't soften. "Mrs. Chen, this hearing has been scheduled for 6 weeks. Your attorney's absence is not the court's problem." "But, Your Honor," Mrs. Chen's voice cracked, "I don't understand on the legal words. I need help. Can we wait? Maybe one more week?" "Mrs. Chen, this court has a busy docket. We cannot reschedule every time someone's personal life interferes with their professional obligations. The plaintiff is ready to proceed. Either you defend yourself or I'll be forced to rule based on the information presented." Marcus sat forward in his seat. This wasn't right. He'd studied enough civil procedure to know that while judges had discretion, leaving someone completely unrepresented in a complex civil case was essentially guaranteeing an unjust outcome. The corporate attorney stood up again, his smile barely concealing his satisfaction. Your Honor, Grandstone Corporation is prepared to present our case. We have documentation showing that Mrs. Chen violated the terms of her commercial lease agreement with our client. We're seeking damages in the amount of $175,000 plus legal fees and court costs. Mrs. Chen gasped. But that's everything! That's my whole business! My life savings! Should have read the contract more carefully, the attorney said smoothly. Your Honor, may we proceed? Judge Hartwell nodded. You may present your opening statement. Marcus's mind raced. He looked at Mrs. Chen, who was tears forming in her eyes. He looked at the smug corporate attorney. He looked at Judge Hartwell, ready to rubber stamp what was clearly an unjust proceeding. Everything in Marcus's training told him to stay quiet. He was just a student. This wasn't his case. Getting involved could create problems for him, maybe even affect his standing at Harvard. His professors always warned students about the dangers of playing hero in real courtrooms. But as the corporate attorney began listing his evidence, painting Mrs. Chen as an irresponsible business owner who deserved to lose everything, something in Marcus stirred. It was the same feeling that had driven him to law school in the first place, the desire to stand between the powerful and the powerless, to be a voice for those who had none. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Baby, you're not going to Harvard just to get rich. You're going because somebody needs to fight for people like us. Marcus stood up. Your Honor, his voice cut through the courtroom, clear and respectful, but firm. I apologize for interrupting, but I believe there may be a procedural issue we need to address. Judge Hartwell's face turned red. Excuse me? Sit down immediately or I'll hold you in contempt. Your Honor, with all due respect, I'm invoking the court's provisions for emergency pro bono representation. My name is Marcus Williams, and I'm a third-year law student at Harvard Law School. I'd like to request permission to represent Mrs. Chen in this proceeding. The courtroom fell absolutely silent. Judge Hartwell stared at Marcus as if he'd grown a second head. The corporate attorney's mouth hung open slightly. Mrs. Chen turned around, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time. The judge leaned forward slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. You've got to be kidding me. Judge Hartwell removed his reading glasses slowly, deliberately, like a parent about to discipline a child who had crossed a line. He stared at Marcus for what felt like an eternity. The silence in the courtroom was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, the judge said, his voice dripping with condescension. You waltz into my courtroom half an hour late, dressed like you're going to a casual Friday at some startup, and now you want to play attorney? Marcus felt every eye in the courtroom boring into him. His palms were sweating, but he kept his voice steady. Your Honor, I'm not playing anything. I'm a qualified law student under the state's student practice rule, which allows third-year law students to appear in court under certain circumstances. Oh, you've read the rules, have you? Judge Hartwell leaned back in his chair, a mocking smile playing at his lips. Tell me, Mr. Williams, have you actually argued a case in court, or did you just finish reading about it in one of your textbooks last night? A few people in the gallery chuckled. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he refused to take the bait. Your Honor, I've worked on 15 cases during my internships, including 3 federal matters, but my experience isn't the issue here. The issue is that Mrs. Chen has a constitutional right to adequate representation, and proceeding without counsel would be— Don't lecture me about constitutional rights, son, the judge interrupted, his tone sharpening. I was practicing law before you were born. I think I know a bit more about the Constitution than some kid who probably got into Harvard because of— He stopped himself, but the implication hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt anger flash through him, hot and immediate.
He knew exactly what the judge had almost said. It was the same assumption people had made his entire life, that his achievements weren't really his, that he only got where he was because someone had given him a handout, not because he had earned it. But Marcus had learned long ago that anger, however justified, wouldn't win arguments in courtrooms. He took a breath and responded with measured calm. Your Honor, if you're questioning my qualifications, I'm happy to provide my academic transcripts, letters of recommendation from federal judges I've clerked for, and my bar certification documents showing I'm eligible to practice under supervision. The corporate attorney, James Morrison, stood up with an exaggerated sigh. Your Honor, if I may, this is highly irregular. Grandstone Corporation has prepared extensively for this hearing. We've arranged for expert witnesses, compiled extensive documentation, and invested considerable resources. We shouldn't be delayed because some law student wants to pad their resume.
The morning of the hearing, Marcus woke up at 5 a.m. He'd barely slept, but adrenaline coursed through his veins like electricity. He put on his best suit, the only real suit he owned, bought at a discount store with money he'd saved from 3 months of working double shifts. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean, pressed, and professional. He met Mrs. Chen outside the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. She looked terrified, clutching a small jade pendant around her neck. "My mother gave me this for luck," she whispered. "I think we need all the luck today." Marcus smiled gently. "We don't need luck, Mrs. Chen. We have the law on our side. That's better than luck." They entered courtroom 4B at exactly 8:45 a.m. Judge Hartwell was already seated, reviewing documents. He glanced up when Marcus entered, and something flickered across his face. Surprised, maybe, that Marcus had actually shown up prepared. James Morrison sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 2 junior associates. They had 4 banker's boxes full of documents, multiple laptops, and the air of people who'd never lost a case like this. Morrison's suit probably cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe. When Morrison saw Marcus, he smiled like a shark. "Williams! I'm actually impressed you showed up. Most people would have realized they were in over their heads and withdrawn." Marcus set down his single briefcase, borrowed from his professor, and met Morrison's eyes. "I don't quit, Mr. Morrison. You'll learn that today." "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The Honorable Judge Richard Hartwell presiding." Everyone stood. Judge Hartwell surveyed the courtroom, his gaze lingering on Marcus for a moment longer than necessary. "Be seated. We're here for the continued hearing in Chen versus Grandstone Corporation. Mr. Morrison, I assume you're ready to present your case?" "More than ready, Your Honor." Morrison stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. "If I may begin with our opening statement?" "Proceed." Morrison's opening was smooth, polished, and convincing. He painted Mrs. Chen as an irresponsible tenant who had violated multiple lease terms, damaged property, and failed to maintain insurance requirements. He made it sound like Grandstone was the victim, forced to take legal action to protect their investment. It was a masterful performance. Even Marcus had to admit it. Several people in the gallery were nodding along. When Morrison finished, Judge Hartwell turned to Marcus. "Mr. Williams, your opening statement. And please, keep it brief. We don't need a lecture on everything you learned in law school." Marcus stood slowly. He had prepared a 20-minute opening, but something told him to go a different direction. He walked to the center of the courtroom, empty-handed. No notes, no theatrics. "Your Honor, Marcin just told you a story. It was a good story. Convincing. But it was fiction." Marcus's voice was calm, clear. "Over the next hour, I'm going to show you the real story. Not with fancy words or expensive presentations, but with facts, documents, evidence. And by the time I'm done, you'll see that this case isn't about one violated lease. It's about a corporation that systematically targets vulnerable small business owners with predatory contracts designed to fail." Judge Hartwell's eyebrow raised slightly. Morrison shifted in his seat. Marcus continued. "Your Honor, Mrs. Chen didn't violate her lease. Her lease was written so that violation was inevitable. And Grandstone knew it. They counted on it, because that's their business model." "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Williams. I hope you can back it up." "I can, Your Honor. May I call my first witness?" What followed was a masterclass in legal advocacy.
Marcus called Mrs. Chen to the stand first, letting her tell her story in her own words. He guided her gently through her testimony, making complex contract issues understandable. When Morrison cross-examined her aggressively, trying to confuse her, Marcus objected at precisely the right moments, citing specific rules of evidence. Then Marcus did something Morrison didn't expect. He called 3 other business owners from the same block, people Marcus had interviewed during his 2 weeks of preparation. One by one, they testified about receiving identical contracts from Grandstone, identical violation notices, identical demands for massive damages. Morrison objected repeatedly. "Your Honor, these honor cases are irrelevant to Mrs. Chen's lease." Marcus was ready. "Your Honor, pattern evidence is admissible under 404B to show modus operandi, common scheme, and absence of mistake. The case of United States versus Beecham established that—" "I know what Beecham says, Mr. Williams," interrupted Judge Hartwell, but his tone had changed. He was listening now, really listening. Objection overruled. Continue. The turning point came when Marcus cross-examined Grandstone's property manager, a nervous man named Richard Polk. Morrison had called him to testify about Mrs. Chen's supposed violations, but Marcus had studied every word of Polk's deposition. "Mr. Polk," Marcus began, his voice friendly, "you testified that Mrs. Chen failed to maintain proper insurance on the property, correct?" "Yes, that's correct." "And you said this violated Section 12, Paragraph C of her lease?" "Yes." Marcus pulled out the lease agreement. "Can you read Section 12, Paragraph C for the court, please?" Polk read it out loud. It required $2 million in liability coverage. "And Mrs. Chen only had $1 million in coverage?" "Correct." Marcus pulled out another document. "Mr. Polk, this is the original proposal that Grandstone sent to Mrs. Chen. Can you read the insurance requirement in this version?" Polk's face went pale. It says $1 million. So the requirement changed between the proposal and the final contract? I don't know. I wasn't involved in, but Mrs. Chen was never notified of this change, was she? In fact, when she purchased her $1 million policy, your company cashed her check for the insurance filing fee, didn't you? Morrison stood up. "Your Honor, I don't see where this is going." "I do," Judge Hartwell said quietly. "Sit down, Mr. Morrison." Marcus continued. Marcus spent the next 30 minutes systematically dismantling every one of Grandstone's claims. He showed how contract terms had been changed without notice, how violation notices cited clauses that didn't exist, how Grandstone's own emails obtained through discovery discussed targeting low-sophistication tenants who wouldn't understand the legal complexity. The courtroom was completely silent except for Marcus's voice. Even the court reporter seemed mesmerized. Finally, Marcus presented his closing argument. No dramatics, no emotional appeals, just cold, hard legal analysis backed by irrefutable evidence. When he finished, Marcus sat down beside Mrs. Chen. She was crying quietly, but this time from hope, not despair. Judge Hartwell sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. When he finally looked down, his expression was unreadable. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," he announced, "then I'll render my decision." The 30-minute recess felt like 30 hours. Marcus sat on a wooden bench in the courthouse hallway, his hands clasped tightly together. Mrs. Chen paced back and forth, her jade pendant swinging with each anxious step. Other business owners who testified lingered nearby, speaking in hushed whispers. Tyler had skipped his classes to be there. He sat beside Marcus, offering silent support. "You destroyed them in there, man. Absolutely destroyed them." Marcus shook his head. "It doesn't matter how well I argued if the judge doesn't rule in our favor. Judges have wide discretion in cases like this. After what you just presented, he'd have to be blind or—" Tyler stopped himself. "Or what?" Marcus asked quietly. "Or biased." "Yeah, that's what I'm worried about." Down the hall, Morrison stood with his associates, their conversation clearly heated. Morrison kept jabbing his finger at one of the junior lawyers. His face red. Things hadn't gone the way they expected. Inside his chambers, Judge Richard Hartwell sat alone at his desk, staring at the file in front of him. But he wasn't reviewing evidence. He was thinking about what had just happened in his courtroom. For 30 years, he'd prided himself on running a fair court. He had presided over thousands of cases, rendered countless judgments. He considered himself impartial, objective, blind to everything except the law. But what he had witnessed over the past 2 hours had shaken something loose inside him. That young man, That student he had dismissed, mocked, assumed was unprepared had just delivered one of the most sophisticated legal arguments Hartwell had seen in years. The research was impeccable. The cross-examination was surgical. The understanding of contract doctrine was deeper than most attorneys with 20 years of experience. Hartwell opened his laptop and did something he rarely did during cases. He searched for Marcus Williams. The results made him sit back in his chair. Marcus Williams, Harvard Law Review, Volume 134, Issue 3, Predatory Commercial Leasing and the Exploitation of Immigrant Business Owners. Marcus Williams, Summer Clerk, Honorable Patricia Morrison, United States District Court, Eastern District of Michigan. Marcus Williams, winner of National Moot Court Competition 2024. There were recommendation letters publicly posted on Harvard's website from a Supreme Court clerk calling Marcus one of the most brilliant legal minds of his generation. There were academic transcripts showing a 3.94 GPA in one of the most rigorous law schools in the world. There were awards, publications, achievements that would make any attorney proud. And Hartwell had looked at this young man and seen nothing. Worse than nothing. He had seen someone to mock, to dismiss, to put in his place. The judge closed his laptop and looked at himself in the reflection of his chamber's window. When had he become this? When had he started judging people by how they looked instead of what they could do? He thought about his own past. His father had been a factory worker who'd saved every penny to send him to college. Hartwell had been the first in his family to become a lawyer. He remembered the condescending looks from wealthy classmates, the professors who assumed he didn't belong, the firm partners who had questioned whether he was their kind of attorney. He'd overcome it all. He'd proven them wrong. And somewhere along the way, he had become exactly what he had once fought against. The realization hit him like a physical blow. There was a soft knock on his door. His clerk, Jennifer, poked her head in. "Your Honor, it's been 30 minutes. They're waiting." Hartwell took a deep breath. "I'll be right there." He stood, straightened his robes, and walked back into the courtroom.